Our next session should be quite interesting on a little bit more detailed level. The idea of transforming claims data to FHIR, the CARIN BB implementation guide. And we have Amol Vyas, the Chief Architect of Interoperability from Cambia Health Solutions. And the topic is the CARIN Alliance is focused on releasing more data with less frictions to consumers who use third-party applications by leveraging FHIR APIs. Amol will be presenting an overview of the CARIN Consumer Direct Payer Data Exchange Implementation Guide. That's a mouthful. Also known as the CARIN IG for Blue Button. Not Blue Bottle, the coffee place, Blue Button. This implementation guide, featuring the Common Payer Consumer Data Set, aims to assist payers in meeting the claims data requirements of the CMS interoperability and patient access final rule. I'm just glad he's presenting and not me. Amol, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks for being with us.
Awesome. So I'm going to start my sharing.
All right, we can see your slides.
Awesome.
All you.
So, hello everyone. It's nice to kind of share some of the latest updates with respect to this implementation guide, and basically have some sort of a channel where we can have some dialogue on the details of this guide. As was said, it's a mouthful, and it literally took a village to get to this point. So I want to kind of give a shout out to the whole CARIN Alliance team, as well as my partners in crime, co-tech leads, for getting us this far. So without further ado, I want to kind of just dig into this. You've seen this slide before, and the scope of this IG, of this overview, is basically the claims data or adjudicated claims data within the patient access API. And so let's get right to it. So the CARIN Blue Button implementation guide, or CARIN IG for Blue Button. I should be careful about saying those words, because those are the blessed words in terms of what we can call it, in addition to the Consumer Directed Payer Data Exchange implementation guide. So the CARIN IG for Blue Button consists of a framework at its heart, and so you can see the framework as a collection of artifacts: the Common Payer Consumer Data Set, data query profiles, which are basically FHIR profiles created on existing FHIR R4 resources, data query implementation guide, which is the implementation guide itself. It kind of contains all the other artifacts on this page. There's a mapping from this common layer of data set, the Common Payer Consumer Data Set, from that to the FHIR resource profiles, also known as the data query profiles here. There is also, work cut out for creating a mapping from, or creating a specification for a physical representation of this CPCDs, because we have basically created a logical representation. And we map that logical representation of the Common Payer Consumer Data Set, right now consisting of only adjudicated claims fields. We map those to the FHIR resource profiles. And those fields are very payer agnostic, as in they're supposed to work for all payers in the nation, and hopefully beyond U.S. According to the 80-20 rule. These data set fields address the 80% of the most prevalent claims adjudication systems. The 20% is what specific implementations would have to factor in as they do their own implementation. And so it kind of provides a blueprint for the bulk of the implementation. The specific implementations would have to factor in the edge cases or the exceptions or specific data set elements that their adjudication systems might have. So we haven't yet decided or come up with a actual physical file format specification for the CPCDs, and that's basically is left to the industry to kind of come up with and kind of coalesce around a common format. We do have a collaboration effort going on in terms of figuring out what that format looks like. So if you're interested, feel free to contact me. I can get you set up with that collaboration. The next slide characterizes the common payer consumer data set a little bit better in terms of we started with the CMS Medicare Blue Button 2.0 API data elements and used those elements as inspiration for the CPCDs. And then we mixed in feedback from the commercial health plans around the nation as part of a data element consensus activity. And that allowed us to basically figure out to a good extent what an 80% view of the overall claims adjudication systems out there looks like. And so that's what we have basically incorporated into the CPCDs. If the CPCDs sounds a little bit like the Argonaut or ONC Common Clinical Data Set or the ONC USCDI V1, then you're right. It is modeled along the same principle where you create an abstract canonical data set that applies for all the specific implementations out there, and then use that as the base for mapping to FHIR. And then all the implementation or implementers would have to do is to basically map their own systems, their own systems of record data models to the CPCDs. So use the CPCDs as a crosswalk to basically stand up their FHIR APIs. This is another view of how the CPCDs and the CARIN Blue Button framework with the IG, FHIR profiles kind of fits into this overall picture, specifically with the EDI X12. The left-hand side is basically the X12 side of the things, where providers submit. Sorry, I forgot to start my video. The providers basically submit claims in X12 through perhaps a EDI clearinghouse, and as part of the submission and response process, the health plan is able to get the claim and adjudicate it. So an adjudicated claims record exists within the system of record at the health plan, and health plans can have one or more systems of record based on how they've kind of they've merged with other health plans or have different systems supporting different lines of businesses. But essentially, that's the source of information where the CPCDs kind of builds out, and then that CPCDs is then mapped to the FHIR profiles. And so it's the adjudicated side, of the claims process that, where the CARIN Blue Button framework and the implementation guide kind of comes in. So I hope that kind of differentiates how the IG kind of compares with some of the claim submission standards out there. I think Ryan has already shared this slide with you, maybe a more updated slide, but I wanted to kind of quickly share with you the scope of the CARIN Blue Button, CARIN IG for Blue Button here, which is this particular box. It kind of is part of the Patient Access API rule, and it provides for consumer access to adjudicated claims, their adjudicated claims data through a third-party app of their choice. And as you can see, a member portal is one of the ways the consumer can basically prove their identity. So it's an identity provider. And basically that's the OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect song and dance that happens as far as the authorization and authentication piece. There's a lot of standards here, as you can see. I want to mention that the CARIN IG does not specify an authorization and authentication standard of its own. It has tried to align with several already established implementation guides or profiles of already established implementation guides. For security, authorization and authentication, it aligns with the Smart App Launch Framework, extensively used on the clinical side. And as part of creating its profiles that have a relation to the clinical side, specifically the U.S. core, the CARIN IG is 100% aligned with the U.S. core, FHIR profiles wherever there is an overlap. Example, patient, practitioner, and so forth. So CARIN IG is 100% aligned with U.S. core. So if you have an app that can accept the CARIN IG patient profile, you should be able to access or consume U.S. core patient profile as well. It kind of comes with it. The next statement is basically around, or the next slide is around the business difference between what the profiles are as part of the implementation guide. So we have currently 4 profiles defined, and those are defined basically along the lines of how they are structurally, how they manifest themselves structurally in terms of whether they are inpatient, institutional, outpatient, institutional, professional, non-clinician, or pharmacy. So this is a business view of those profiles. We do have a couple of profiles that we'll offer as draft in the coming week, and those are vision and dental, just to kind of complete the claims data picture. And those will be kind of, shared with the HL7 as well as, other communities, and they'll be kind of vetted through the HL7 process and added to the implementation guide. So I would say stay tuned for that because those are coming. This is another picture of the same information that I showed before. This is a little bit techie picture in the sense it's very similar to an ER diagram. It basically shows which profiles are in play within the CARIN IG and how they are related. The center of the universe for CARIN Blue Button IG is the explanation of benefit FHIR R4 resource. And that represents the adjudicated claim at a payer. And so based on that, we have defined 4 profiles right now with 2 more coming. And these profiles are connected to other reference profiles. So these are all reference resources, all the shaded ones here, as you can see here. They're all reference resources attached to this main EOB-based profiles. Those are all either related or aligned with U.S. core, with the red border here, where there is an overlap with U.S. core, or created specifically by the CARIN Blue Button implementation guide for the purposes of this use case. The coverage and there's I think just the coverage resource. It does not have a U.S. core corresponding profile, and so we went ahead and created our own coverage profile. The next slide is again another view of the same information. I call this as a cheat sheet. It basically lays down what are the relationships between the profiles at the actual data element level, or at the slice level, which is another manifestation of an element. This picture or these two slides kind of lay down what the relationships are and which profiles are using rather the specific slides and elements. And more importantly, what are some of the terminologies, so code sets used as part of the specific elements here. And so very important slide if you're looking at it from a development or developer or software engineering perspective. And again, this is an eye chart. The document that we'll be sharing with you all will have all of this information in there, including links that you can access at leisure later on. One of the key aspects of the IG search or the IG is the search, and so we've basically established a set of search criteria that takes into account some of the business requirements that exist on the payer side. One of the most important business requirement on the payer side is that an adjudication of a claim, a submitted claim, always happens in the context of the point in time representation of certain information. And that includes what is the coverage as of the date of service. And what is the practitioner information at the date of service? There's demographic information associated with different, reference resources like practitioner, patient, and organization. So the IG is basically, is as guidance is saying that we need the exact point in time version of the coverage included with the EOB reference resources. The other reference resources could be point in time, but if the payer does not keep the point in time copies, the date of service, as of the date of service copies of the reference information, it is free to pass just the current copies. And so with that search criteria, we hope that we have accommodated most of the payers, pretty much I would like to thank all of the payers in the nation in terms of how apps will be able to search on the explanation of benefit information. The following tables are basically details around what are some of the search parameters and what are some of the ways that apps can get the reference resources, either through underscore includes or they can use specific reads to actually look up the specific reference resources. And obviously this assumes that when an EOB is returned, that basically starts the ball rolling. An app basically fetches the EOB for the user in context, the selected patient. And once the EOB is received by the app basically cracks open the EOB, looks at all the references passed by the server as far as the search, as far as the search that's in play, and turns around and can either call them or as part of a read, or if it has specified underscore includes, they'll already be included as part of the response. So there's two ways apps can kind of get at the deeper information in terms of reference resources. These three slides kind of talk to how implementers can use the mapping between the CPCDs and the FHIR profiles. As you can imagine, the mapping kind of goes deep into the details. Basically, in terms of providing a blueprint for how FHIR APIs can be stood up in a very consistent way. And so this will definitely be of use as you kind of get into the details of the FHIR implementation. And these 3 slides kind of talk about how you can interpret the information presented in the mapping spreadsheet. It's very similar to any mapping document, as in you have a source. In this case, you've got the green columns, the CARIN CPCDs elements, and the destination, which in this case is, are the FHIR elements based on the levels they're at in the hierarchy. For example, level 0 is the top element in the explanation of benefit resource structure. Then you've got the level 1, the next level, supporting info, and then so forth. The idea behind the mapping is that based on the different profiles that we have, you will have to refer to the specific tabs within the mapping, mapping spreadsheet to see which profile has the kind of mapping that is fit for that information. The data element index basically lists out all the it's an index of information in terms of CPCDs elements and the profile specific high-level mappings that that are in play. The specific tabs, you get into the details around terminologies to be used, any constraints that we are talking about here in terms of specific values that are allowed, and so forth. And this is basically speaking to how we have organized the profiles. We've basically created a base profile, an abstract profile that holds a common information called EOB base, and then all the other profiles, the 4 concrete profiles, which you'll see out in the wild as part of the responses from the server, they kind of are based off of the base. So we're able to kind of push down certain common things to the base and only worry about the varying things in the specific concrete profiles. So I wanted to kind of quickly give a status on the ballot reconciliation. As I mentioned, the CARIN Blue Button, the CARIN IG for Blue Button is under the ballot reconciliation process, and I would say we're very close to being done. As you can see, the count of remaining tickets here is 33. We started with 252. And it is my hope that we will be done with with all the tickets by the end of this month. There's a HL7 working group meeting in the between now and the end of this month, which might kind of skew that timeline a little bit, but we definitely want to get this done as soon as possible, so we have a published IG that payers can take and call it as the final version, STU1 version. There are some references that are in the references section, just links that provide more context, more detailed context around this implementation guide. Feel free to kind of visit them and get a more clearer picture. I do want to mention the couple of links to the tracks that we've had, the CARIN IG for Blue Button tracks that we have had at previous Implementathon or Connectathon events. Those are great resources for the latest and the greatest information. Unless you prefer going to the JIRA and hunting all the tickets that have the latest and the greatest attachments, I wouldn't recommend that for the faint-hearted, but do go to the track pages. The last track was at the HL7 Virtual Connectathon, I guess a week ago, and that has some pretty good information in terms of not just information on the technical information on the IG, but also perhaps other implementers that are doing the same thing, and so you can network with them and perhaps identify solutions or common patterns with them. with that, I think that's pretty much I had. I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, Amol, thank you very much. That was great. You ran right through that with a nice pace. Appreciate that so much. First question, if a health plan doesn't maintain one of the must support data elements, how do they handle that? And how do they let third-party apps know?
That's a great question. Like I said, the IG is based on the U.S. core implementation guide as far as a lot of patterns, and must support and missing data guidance is based on the corresponding must support and missing data guidance for U.S. core. What that means is if a must support element cannot be supported by a payer server, then there's basically two options. If the must support was an optional element, they don't have to do anything. They basically, since it's an optional, they can skip it. They can just skip it. But I want to stress that that's only if they don't have that element. If they do have that element, the must support calls for the exposure of that element as part of the implementation guide response, the API response. Now, the second possibility is that the must support element is a required one, and that's where the U.S. core implementation guide prescribes certain patterns to basically pass that data, because the data has to be passed because it's a required field, and so it's a required field issue and not a must support issue at that point. And the way you provide data when you don't have the data for a required field is through passing certain special values, for example, invalid data or missing value, or maybe a -1 in terms of an integer data type, and all that guidance is given as part of the IG. I guess the main point is if the element is required, it doesn't really matter if it's must support. It's got to be provided, and if you don't have that element, then there are ways you can still pass that element, indicating to the client that this data doesn't really exist, and so the third-party app should take appropriate steps.
Okay. Hey, maybe just one more. Will there be sample synthetic data available for each of the resource types in CARIN BBIG?
That's a great question, and that's something that we are trying to figure out a good strategy for. We have received certain examples that we'll make available through the IG, but those, for the most part, those examples are handmade or handwritten. Creating test data at scale is a bit tricky in terms of the fact that payers don't have open APIs. Payers simply, several payers don't have open APIs. So, exposing data outside the enterprise is not a common scenario for payers. And so payers will have their, non-prod environments, but most of those environments are within the enterprise and are strictly controlled by their security offices. So those test data sets cannot be exposed outside. Payers will, many payers will not be able to do that. And so what we're doing is we're trying to see if there's any synthetic data tools. MITRE Cynthia is for one great tool. If we can kind of build on a synthetic data tool to provide test data at scale. And so to that we already have a collaboration started in terms of refining the MITRE Cynthia CPCDs exporter tool to make sure that it outputs a compliant CPCDs extract that can basically be transformed by a server to create FHIR profiles. So if you're interested in being part of that effort, do contact me either via Zulip or email, and we can get you set up with that collaboration.
Excellent. Well, that was a great offer. Thank you. And thanks for a great session.